Okay, I'm Ben Frank, and I'm very excited to have an awesome guest on today's show. This episode is going to be a little bit different because normally I'm interviewing athletes or leaders or coaches specifically in sport. And today I have on Ari Meisel, who is a coach of entrepreneurs. He's also a best-selling author, a speaker, and he's been a tremendous help for my wife Joyce and I in leading our own sports organizations. Ari, welcome to the show.
Thank you, and thanks for the kind words. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, for those in our audience who aren't familiar with you, maybe just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
So my name's Ari Meisel, obviously, and I help make entrepreneurs more replaceable. So we work with entrepreneurs who are successful and have more opportunity than they can handle, and show them how to create systems and processes and optimize, automate, and outsource everything in their business so that they can step away if they wanted to. Because a lot of entrepreneurs seek entrepreneurship because they want freedom, and they end up creating a trap in their own business.
Awesome. And one of the things that's so fascinating to me is I think there's actually a lot of similarities that people may not even think of between entrepreneurs, athletes, even the entertainers, people that have like a specific talent or thing that they do that they do great, some kind of unique ability or unique talent. And so when some people hear the word replaceable, maybe at first it seems maybe almost a negative thing or whatever. They're just thinking they're just not going to do anything. Can you just maybe expand that on a little bit as far as what they're being replaced in?
Yeah, so there's a big difference between being replaced and being replaced. There's also a difference between being replaceable or being irreplaceable and indispensable. Right? So we want people to be indispensable because that means that there's a function that they perform that is just so amazing that it helps the business so many ways. But it doesn't mean that the business cannot operate without them. We need companies that can thrive without us because what more could you ask for in your company than its ability to function without you there? Right. And we want to get to a place where your business is being pushed forward with your ideas rather than your hands. So you don't have to be there. You don't have to be in the office. You don't have to be burning the midnight oil and all those grind and hustle and all those other buzzwords people like to use so that you can have a business that really operates without you. Because if you don't, then you don't really operate a business. You really just own your own job if you can't leave if you wanted to.
Yeah. And I can definitely see the relationship even as a coach. I remember when I first started coaching athletes, the goal is not to just when you're there for them to be able to perform and do things in a certain way when you're there. The goal is to create something that can make a result beyond what you're able to do personally. I think though, even for athletes, some of the similarities, I think probably what you see, right, is entrepreneurs who are a one-man band, who are just they do the work, they do all the work, probably can never get to a certain level versus, and it's the same thing I think in athletes. Professional athletes have a team of people that are surrounding them. Maybe you can even talk a little bit about, you talk about outsourcing personal life and being able to focus on what you do best and things. Maybe even just talk about that mindset as far as not doing everything and more.
It's really hard for people, and there's a lot of ego involved in it because we tie so much value, like personal value and self-worth, to the things that we're able to do for our company or for other people or for our customers. You always, when people they want to talk to the person, right? The client wants to talk to the founder. There's a reason for that, and it usually makes us feel really good about ourselves. But at the end of the day, it is a trap. Because it makes it that if the business can't operate without you there, then you're creating a very, very bad situation. It becomes very resentful of the business that they've created. So understanding that the majority of what you do and what you are is not that unique. Right. And that's a hard one. It's a really hard one for people to sort of get through that, but it's not that unique. You're not that unique. There's 1,000 other people that do exactly what I do and do what you do. What makes us unique is our perspective, I think, and some of the ways that we come up with ideas. But at the end of the day, the function of us, right, is not something unique. There's no way that you're the best at booking travel, right? That's just not a possibility. Yet so many CEOs and so many COOs book their own travel, which is just crazy to me. So you have to start to think about, what are you really good at? And what if you could spend 100% of your time doing that thing?
Yeah. So, okay. So interesting to maybe compare to an athlete. If you were talking to, let's say, an owner of the Houston Rockets, Tillman Fertitta, or someone who owns a professional sports team, how would they help support, even for professional athletes, that right? in that mindset? Because I don't think I really hear this talked about a lot with professional athletes. I do hear more and more professional athletes are starting to have more and more, a bigger team of people that are doing things around them, but I still think there's a more focus just on the physical skills.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, for example, JJ Redick lives in my building,
Okay.
who actually just got traded to, I think, Miami. But, you know, he has a podcast, he has a business, he has other things that are happening, right? But he's the talent, right? And at the end of the day, like, that's what I think a lot of athletes need to be, is they need to focus on being the talent. They certainly, if they're going to be smart, they need to invest their money wisely. They should have things that are supporting them that are outside of the sport itself. But when it comes to the sport, right, that's what they should be doing. They are the talent. And you can apply this to athletes. I think you can apply this to the owners. You can apply this to business owners as well. Like, we need to start thinking of ourselves as the talent.
Yeah, and that's the definitely the similarity between whether it's a pro athlete, whether it's even or like I said, a leader in an organization, a coach, or you often hear Bill Belichick. They talk about him as almost like a CEO and things, and they can't do
Right.
everything themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So maybe we can talk a little bit about productivity as well, because I think similarly, you talk about in your first book, you talk about what you went through from working so hard and being very successful, but then having, getting ill and then having to make a lot more out of your time and kind of coming to that realization. And same thing with athletics, even training. More is not always just better. Volume is not necessarily get a better result, and then actually starting to analyze what you're doing with your time and how to be more productive.
Yeah. So, the quick story, right, about my background is that I got a chronic illness, and took me essentially from working 18 hours a day to working an hour a day at best. And it's a really interesting thing to think about for yourself, the time restriction that you might put on yourself, because the people that you ask them how they're doing and they say, "Oh, I'm so busy. I'm just so busy." They probably have a lot more time than they realize, and they're just not using it correctly. And if you really push that person and say, "Well, what are you doing all day?" they probably won't have a very good answer. And I've done this with so many people. It's like amazing. It's like, well, I'm just busy. I'm busy,
Yeah.
Well, with what? So, because it's an attack immediately, right? It's like, what do you mean? You're saying I'm not busy?
Yeah.
Because that's such a good thing for them. So when I think about that restriction, I love to ask people who work like a 9-to-5 job, what would you do if you could only work till 4? Right? Like, if you had to take an hour off early of the day, most people just say that they would skip lunch. But if you ask that same person, say, what would you do if you only had an hour a day? What would you do? It's a totally different way of thinking. It's a completely different mindset. And at that point, the question really isn't what would you do? It's what wouldn't you do? And if you wouldn't do certain things that still have to get done, who or what is going to do them for you? So it's a lot more helpful to start thinking about the things that you won't do and figure out ways to get those done.
And you found, and when you actually analyze it, right, there's certain things that you maybe even realize don't even maybe need to be done, or the things other people can do. That's really interesting to me, like the time restriction that actually can create a bigger result rather when you actually analyze it by creating. You've talked about that before about restrictions. I think you said restriction creates freedom, or restraints creates freedom. Maybe speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I think restrictions breed innovation. You give somebody a blank check or unlimited space or unlimited time, and they won't get very much done. I promise you. I've seen it time and time again. But if you have somebody, they're forced to be innovative. I love to give the MacGyver example, right? Which is that nobody ever said to MacGyver, like, there's a Home Depot across the street, go pick up what you need and go blow up that building, right? It was always like, here's a paper clip and a box of Bisquick, go blow up the building. So if there's no reason to innovate, people won't innovate. And at the end of the day, your ability to innovate, I think, is the most unique aspect about you.
Interesting, right? Because at the end of the day, there is a, there's a time limit that you have in the day, and so it's somewhat capped. If you don't innovate that or improve that, it's capped. Your time is capped. There's only so much you can possibly do before you completely burn out. You hear the stories of certain athletes, working out for 7 hours a day or things like that. It doesn't necessarily mean it's more productive. Maybe you can talk about that. You talk a lot about being replaceable. You talk about optimize, automate, outsource. Can you just explain that process of why you don't just, because I see people, if they talk about delegating, they just, I'm just going to get someone else to do this without actually thinking about their process first.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that honestly is like the summary. And the thing is people are too quick to be like, no, I don't want to do this. Here, someone else take it. And the thing is, if you take an inefficient problem or process and you give it to somebody else who has less context, less information, less experience, and then magically expect a more successful result than you were achieving, you're just setting everybody up for failure. So we really have to start with optimizing first, which is really looking at how we do what we do now. And oftentimes it's about removing things, just as that thing I said before about how it's really not about what would you do, it's what wouldn't you do. Mm-hmm. So the optimizing is really taking a hard look. It's a lot of tracking, which I think a lot of athletes can appreciate. And everything from self-tracking and biohacking to tracking your money and tracking the time that your team spends on various activities. All of that information is very, very powerful, because then we can start to look at the inefficiencies that are inherent in the things that we do. Once we've done that, we want to look at automation before we go to people, because at the end of the day, if you bring people into a problem, you are bringing in their problems. And every human being has problems. And so they will bring inefficiencies, they'll make mistakes, they'll get bored, they'll be sick, they'll quit. All of these things happen when you bring people in. So you want to start with automation first, and we can automate things now that a week ago a person had to do, and we can do it for free. So you look at what you can automate, and then whatever's left over is something that a human being really needs to do and can bring value to, and honestly can feel empowered by. So that order is extremely important.
And so, so these sound like these are mindsets that whether you're a pro athlete with millions of dollars at your disposal, whether you're even an amateur athlete trying to get somewhere, or you're a big sports facility company, or even a smaller company, a smaller name nonprofit, these are, I think, philosophies that sounds like you said, if you analyze them and you can optimize them, that you can make big strides still as well, and towards you want to go. You mentioned biohacking. I know you have some. It's not your main thing, but I know you have some knowledge and things in there as well. You talk about peak time. Is there anything you could share with us, just as far as that kind of things for training that could be helpful for athletes and coaches?
Yes, absolutely. So peak time is one of the things that we look at for productivity. And it's a 90-minute period in the day where you are 2 to 100 times more effective than any other time of the day. And what they mean in that context by more effective is that you're more able to go into a flow state. And that period of time is different for everybody. For me, it happens to be between 10 and noon. Do you know what yours is?
Yeah, mine's in the evening, which was surprising to me. I think it's like 7 o'clock or something like that.
Yeah, there you go. Okay. So if you find that time and you just protect that time from anything else and just do your highest and best thing during that, whether that's coming up with content or brainstorming or writing, or maybe it's practicing a particular skill, a physical skill, you'll be amazed at the ability that you have to execute on that kind of information. But what it also does is then it starts to show you other times a day where you're better off doing certain things. So every one of us is different in terms of when we should eat, sleep, work out, and do creative work, do admin work, do brain dead, tired work. Like there's a different time of day for everyone. And if we start to find that, it's remarkable the difference in productivity that you'll understand.
Yeah, I think it'd be so fascinating if a Golden State Warriors or someone hired you to look at their whole thing. You'd have so much tracking, and all the players would have all this tracking and all their daily activities and things. You'd be analyzing everything to make sure it's efficient. They'd have different workout times. They'd have different sleep times. They'd eat times and whatever. But I can imagine, like you said, if you imagine you told an athlete or a coach of a team, wherever, hey, we can get a 200% better result from today's training session if you just change the time of it, or and you don't even know these things if you're not even looking at it. There's so much old school stuff in sport that is just being done because that's the way that it's always been done. You probably see that in business a lot as well, I guess, and it's just questioning those approaches.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's far too easy, and I know that the sports industry tends to be pretty innovative, but it's so easy to just get into this pattern of doing the things that have always worked because we've always done them. Mm-hmm. And so we're not going to change that. I mean, if shuttle runs, right, were like the thing that got people right, then why would we change it? Why would we look at new ways of dealing with that? But we can get so dialed in now with data and science that, and again, I think that the sports industry is probably farther ahead of the curve on that. But if you think about that in businesses, you have companies that are managing their business in a Google Sheet, for the last 10 years.
Yeah. Totally. And one of you talk about Justin Kavanaugh, one of the best speed coaches in the world, in your book. So maybe we can switch a bit to leaders in sport and leaders in sport organizations or facilities. So he's an amazing speed coach, right? He works with some of the top athletes, and he talks in your book just about that, about like things that have always been that things have always been done. And I think a lot of people, especially in sport, I mean, I'm sure it's in business as well in general, but especially coaches or leaders in sport, they're the name, or they're the brand. So maybe you can just share a little bit about, for example, someone like that who's like a great strength coach or whatever, and they're building a business, about that mindset about replacing themselves without replacing themselves. Just a little bit more on that.
Yeah. So there's a difference between a mind and a method, right? And so if he's been able to produce, which he has, if he's been able to produce consistent results in people, then that means that there's a method. It's his method, but there's a method. And that means that it's transferable and it can be taught, right? And it can be licensed and franchised if you wanted to. So you can scale your knowledge without having to scale your time along with it. Is a really important way to think about that. And we see this a lot in businesses, particularly where there is a person who is like the guru in the company, right? Or not even the guru, but like the final word. So there's an example I'm thinking of. I had a client who was telling me that the biggest bottleneck in his business was his father, because it was a law firm. There were 6 partners, and his father is a senior partner. And every time they put out a document that went to a client, the father had to review it, which is a significant bottleneck, obviously. So I asked him if he's ever documented his father's review process, and he's like, "Oh yeah, we do a first draft and then we send it to him." I was like, "No, have you documented his review process, what he goes through?" He's like, "Well, no, he's just been doing it for 40 years, and so he just does it." It's like, no, that doesn't work that way. I said, next time he does it, stand over his shoulder, and when he makes a change, ask him why. And if he can explain why, then there's a method there, and you just keep going, and then eventually you can do all those things before you even get to them, and then eventually you can cut him out of the process entirely, and he can focus on other things. Because unfortunately, a lot of us, you get to a point where you're really top of your game, and then you relegate yourself to menial tasks that just get in the way, and we have to start thinking about protecting ourselves more.
Yeah, there's so much of that, right? That there's almost, people just assume that they're a genius with that, and they don't even really dig into the details of what they do. And you're saying probably there's a great percentage of what they're doing that could be broken down into a method. And like, do you think ego is one of the biggest things, that the hardest reasons why an expert like
100%.
that won't do it?
100%.
Afraid of being replaced, or what is it most of the time?
Yeah. So when I give talks, usually I talk about replaceability, not half the room, I'd say like 80% of the room is excited about it, and 20% are really freaked out about it. Mm-hmm. And you have to think about why that is. Like, what is so scary about you not being needed in your business? It's different than like not being needed in your family. Although at the same time, right, all of us want to raise happy, independent children. Right. They should need us. They should want us. And I think that's a big difference, right? So you want the boss with the great knowledge to be there because he or she is a great leader and has great knowledge. But you don't want to need them to be there. That's a really bad dynamic.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think even for coaches and their athletes as well. And what is that limiting belief, you think, that for people that have a hard time letting go of that?
Well, first of all, I think that there's 2 things. There's ego, but there's also a trust thing, because it's also really easy to just be like, there's no way anybody could do what I do.
Yeah.
And the thing, like, that might seem like you're really valuable, but at the same time, that actually makes you seem like you're really petty, honestly. Because if you can't teach what you know, mastery comes through teaching, in my opinion, right? And what better gift or validation of your abilities than if you could teach somebody else how to do it. See, that's the thing. Is I look at this as such a positive thing. Like, what more could we want than a business that runs without us? What more could we want than the ability to impart our knowledge on someone else so that they could actually do something with it useful? But most people just don't see it that way. They think that their value is their seat at their desk and the things that they say.
Wow. Yeah. So going through that process of actually being able to teach that special, unique thing that you do actually creates a further level of mastery.
That's right.
It doesn't diminish you.
Right. And, so it's like, people don't want to like give away their secrets. And, the thing is, in the world today, 20 years ago, if you wanted to keep a secret, you didn't tell anybody about it and you went and got a patent. Now, if you want to keep a secret, you tell everybody, you put it on the internet so everybody knows it's yours.
So you do it first, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. So, share that knowledge and you can learn other things.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I know we're on a tight time window and we only have you for a couple of minutes. I really appreciate you coming on. Can you tell our viewers where they can find more of you? There's a million, I probably have another 30 questions I could ask you, but I know you have a great podcast with a lot of different topics. Where can people find you to get more information about what you do?
Yeah, so everything is at lessdoing.com. They can find the books, the podcast, the blog, all of our programs are there. But the Less Doing podcast is on iTunes and Stitcher and everywhere else. And I'm very proud of that. Actually, we're coming up on my 400th episode.
Awesome.
We'd love people to check that out if they found this interesting. Yeah,
I just listened to one about goals, objectives, and outcomes, and I think that's very applicable to sport as well. So I encourage them to check that out, and maybe in the future you can dig more into some of that stuff.
Yeah. Well, hey, thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for being on. Appreciate it.